I still have to log in, so we're good. Today we're going to do a couple of different things. Is the lighting okay for you?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to do a couple of different things. We're focusing on the late 1960s. So when we left off yesterday, remember we were watching the Monday. We were watching that Vietnam documentary, right? And we're in the middle of 1967 and tensions were rising, right? We all remember this? We're all back with me? Cool. So today we're going to be in the late 1960s, and it's hard to exaggerate all of the drama that went on in the late 60s. It's a very fascinating time in U.S. history. It's also a very tumultuous time in American history. And so what we're going to do today is, in groups, we're going to break into groups, and each group is going to take ownership of one particular event or group that was active at this time, and then you guys are going to teach the rest of us what happened. Make sense? Cool, I'll give you more instructions. But we're going to start off there. So our theme today is radicalism. And so we're going to start with, this is just a short intro to kind of get you in the mood for what's going on in the late 1960s. This is from a documentary on Netflix called Bobby Kennedy for President. It's about the presidential race of Bobby Kennedy that was cut short. He was assassinated in 1968. We'll talk about that today. But this intro kind of just gives you a visual of what was kind of going on in the streets. I will warn you there's some foul language, but you guys are used to that by now.
Foul language?
I know.
Okay, I can see this.
Horrifying.
This is supposed to be flash.
This is one of those things, remember we talked about potential extra credit. If you were to watch this and send you a paragraph or two about what you thought, you could get some extra credit.
Anything. The United States is becoming two countries, one white, one black.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brother.
Well, if there's going to be another riot, I want to be prepared.
You know, it is necessary.
We can't continue to live in a nation every summer going up in flames. Every day killing up people in Vietnam like we're killing. We are trying to save this nation.
The Tet Offensive broke out in January. Vietnam spun out of control.
The Vietnamese New Year test. The enemy showed on this occasion to unleash well-coordinated attacks in several areas of the Republic.
Now demonstrators shout down government officials, and the government harassed protesters. Anarchists threatened to burn the country down, while tanks have patrolled American cities, and machine guns have been fired at American children. Truly, we seem to fulfill the vision of Yeats. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, Here anarchy is loosed upon the world.
Is it fair to say then that you are dissatisfied?
I think you have to be dissatisfied. I don't think that we should turn to violence. I don't think that we should turn to war as the answer to the solution to the problem. So I'm dissatisfied with our society. I suppose I'm dissatisfied with our country. I'm dissatisfied with the fact that perhaps that I don't do enough personally.
The chaos spurred me into sitting down and writing a letter to my friend Bob.
All right, we're gonna pause there. So, that's a very chaotic scene, right? Obviously, that's not what every single day was like in 1968, but it gives you this concept of what was going on in the streets, that there were these constant protests, there were riots, and that there was a lot of turmoil. A lot of people were angry and frustrated, and they were very active politically. So on your own, I want you guys to define the word radical for me. What does that word mean? What do you associate it with? How do you define it personally? Just do some free writing. All right, so lay it on me. How do you define radical? Yes, Dan.
I said the word radical denotes an extreme bias towards an idea.
Okay. So extreme bias towards an idea. Okay. What else did people write down? Sid.
Extremism that's based off of fear and anger.
Okay.
It includes fear and anger.
Interesting. Okay, Ryan?
A way to portray the attributes of a group to the extreme.
Okay, so again, focusing on a group and it's very extreme, right? Okay, anyone else? You had your hand up, Christian.
I said extremism.
Extremism, okay. All right. Now we use the word radical in all kinds of different ways, right? There's like the scientific free radical, which I will not explain because I am not a scientist, right? And then there's like radical as in like if something's rad, right? That became kind of a term of like, oh, that's cool, right? I don't know that I have the cultural authority to say something like that, but we'll move past it. But then there's political radicalism, right? You guys all kind of keyed into that's probably what I'm talking about, right? So I can see all of you guys pulled up extremism. Can someone pull up just on your phones or your technology what the dictionary definition of radicalism is, or radical? It's the race to see who can type the fastest. Who has the best service? You got it?
Yeah, it says relating to or affecting the fundamental nature of something.
Okay, so it affects the fundamental nature of something, right? Now, that's important. What do you guys think that means?
Abnormal.
Affecting what?
Abnormal.
Okay, it's abnormal or different? Affecting the fundamental nature of something. What else does it mean besides different or abnormal or extreme? What does this part refer to, the fundamental nature? What do you guys think? Yeah.
Like just the preconceptions of like an idea. So
Right.
like saying, oh, that's not how everyone views it now, or whatnot.
Okay, yeah, so almost like the status quo, right? So, an important element of radicalism is this extremism, right? This extreme bias towards an idea, like Dan said, right? Often it's attributed to fear and anger, Sid, which is what you said. I think that some radicals might argue that that's just, that it's actually the other side, the fundamental nature people that are afraid and angry, right? So I think we'll work with that today on where's that fear and anger coming from. And then affecting the fundamental nature. So what's important is that if there are a lot of ideas that are extreme, right? I could have an extreme idea. I could walk into this classroom and say, hi, hello, chocolate ice cream is the most important ice cream flavor in the world, and I'll never be swayed, right? I could have a really extreme bias towards the idea that chocolate ice cream is amazing, right? Does that affect the fundamental nature of anything? Does that affect fundamentally your life in any way? No, right? But what would be a more radical idea that I could come in with? Yeah.
You can't like any other ice cream, and if you do, you have to leave the classroom.
Yeah, so what if I walked in and said, okay, hi, hello, if any of you are lactose intolerant, you have to get out. I won't teach you. Right? That affects the fundamental nature of something, right? That affects the idea that as an instructor, I'm supposed to teach everyone, regardless of their tolerance or intolerance of milk, right? And so, and as silly as this seems, that's a really important aspect of radicalism, right? Is that in order for something to be truly radical, it has to be pushing back, right? It has to be challenging something that already exists, okay? Does that make sense? So as we go through our next assignment, you guys are gonna have to think about what makes these groups that we're gonna be learning about, what makes them radical? What are they challenging in society or in the status quo or in people's beliefs that is so threatening to that fundamental nature? Make sense? Okay. So, we need to be in 3 groups. Perfect. We're almost evenly split now. So, I have 3 sets of primary source documents based on 3 different groups that were active and some would consider radical in the late 60s, okay? So those 3 groups are the Black Power movement, Cesar Chavez and the UFW, United Farm Workers of America, and the American Indian League, okay? And those aren't the only groups that are active at this time. We're going to talk more about other groups, particularly women and gay liberation when we get back from Thanksgiving. But today we're going to focus on these 3 groups. And so what you're going to do is you're going to read through the primary sources that I'm going to provide you, okay? And then using technology, using your textbook. I have a couple of extra copies of the textbook with me in case none of the groups have them. If you do have yours, pull it out. You guys are going to, and then again, you'll have online resources. You guys are gonna pull through these things. You guys are gonna prepare a 5-minute lesson to teach the rest of us. Okay? Yep. We're gonna do it. It's gonna be great. So, there are details about the assignment in your packet. But here's the important part. While you guys are working, and you'll be working together to try and figure out who these people are, what am I gonna teach the rest of my classmates about them, I have these blank slides, and I'll be going around with my laptop and through the power of technology. You guys are going to tell me what to add to those slides, so that then when you come up here, this looks exactly the way you want it to, and you guys can teach us the way that makes the most sense for you. All right? So now the real drama is who's going to get which group. Does anyone feel particularly strongly that they would like a certain... Yes, Brisney.
I want Cesar.
Okay. Kayla, did you also want Cesar Chavez? You can flip around to their table.
That's what I did my primary sources.
Yeah, so why don't you flip? I kind of figured you would. She's working on, for her project, she's working on agriculture and immigration, so why don't you? All right, so you guys are Cesar Chavez and the UFW. Lee, I'm sorry, can you sneak over here?
Yeah.
And join them so we can balance out the groups? Thank you. All right, who's gonna win?
Black Power movement.
All right, you guys are American Indian movement. Here you go. All right, so read through your primary sources, start to answer your questions, and begin to build your
It's all
lesson
connected or different.
that you're going to teach the rest of us.
Should have been 6 today.
My second to last class.
These are the documents.
Are these two documents connected at all? So we'll read them together.
I do complete question.
Who is Cesar
Figure out
Chavez?
how you were
Who are
going
the other
to.
teachers of the What happened in the Lorno break?
American Indian.
What is the main goal,
Do you have any knowledge, real
of
quick,
Cesar
on
Chavez?
the textbook, or any visual?
What strategies
all the notes?
Need to
do
prepare
I'll figure this in the notes, but I don't know
a
eight.
3 to 5 minute
No,
lesson
9. No, 8.
try in order to gain public support
I'm secure.
on the
What makes
American
Cesar
Indian.
Chavez
I said that has that
The
on
lesson will need
Wanna
to
trade it?
incorporate your answer to the question.
So are you?
While you were working on a lesson, I will compile from my laptop. Your group can tell me what to add to the American Indian movement slide as bullet points. So basically, we're all like coming up with a lesson plan on the American Indian movement. And we're gonna then tell her, like, just main ideas. I think so.
So I would get started by reading through some of those primary sources that you guys have. And I'll pass up the There's a wide variety. Oh my God, I found it. I can't actually read it. Can you read that? I know it's printed.
It's just saying people are
I'm gonna
teaching
pull it up.
and like they have credentials. But like, oh, the speaker on Thursday night is Howard Fuller. The speaker on Friday night is Dr.
Okay,
Jimmy
school
Brewer.
ones, NCIO news.
I don't know if it's, I was just trying to say, perhaps it's a chapter. What's the Friday next week? Oh, these guys,
Challenge
there you
week?
go.
And then there's
Oh, these guys are probably like,
someone can be looking at the book,
ah,
and
okay,
then
there we
someone
go.
can be researching on that.
Okay, so I can start answering these because I have a
You
list.
want to do both, which one, you guys want, challenge week or American Indian movement?
The American Legion.
You're not finding it? There he is. Terrible guy's last name. For your organizations? American movement extends through quite a bit of the 70s. Feel free to go that route, or you can just focus on what's going on in the late 60s or the 70s and kind of narrow your focus in there. You don't have to tell the whole story.
I'm reading the
right?
first
You can
one.
tell the big picture too.
That one's the end of that. Why?
Do you want to read this one too?
How's it going? It's super small, right?
Yeah, I had to look it up, but I found it.
Did you find it?
Yeah, I found it. Much larger copy.
Not quite the same. Yeah, this is 73 so it's gonna be really similar.
So does it sound like here?
It's a similar platform.
Pretty
So
much
it'll,
late 1960s.
yeah, I don't know why they're printed so small. I'm drumming a skull.
I'll give it to him.
There you go.
Yeah, that's why it's a little bit different from this one, but same basic. What question?
Holy cow, that's way worse. I'm just answering the first one because I literally just get a list.
I'm gonna tell you.
I can make out, we went all something, or we want all black men to be exempt from military service. Yes, we want a dogma or people that express true something descendant. Still in the current. Us. Thank you. What source did you get in
I got the black pile one.
It's over snow.
Yeah. It's about like a, more like a speech night, basically.
I wonder if this is referring to like the people speaking, like who's speaking.
Stokely Carmichael and some guy named Rex
Okay.
at Greenwood. Greenwood?
Share with your group and stuff.
So I have like an entire list of a bunch of speakers speaking.
Alright.
For example, we have like Fred Patton, Ronald Finney, Dr. Nathan Hare, Edwina Hawley. It's like it looks like there's like a few like panels and whatnot. And it establishes like credentials that they have, like
Church team, Stokely Carmichael.
Like this guy's like the president of the Black Student Union and Black Power Institution. This is parentheses Tennessee Congress. I'm not sure what that's just talking about like congressional group maybe. I have no idea. educate the public though with this week of speeches and panels all the time. What are your things?
Black Power thought that they were still barred from the liberties. They're wasting part-time, like housing, their existing jobs. They thought that the traditional civil rights movement focused too much on legal segregation of society, and not enough on the poverty.
Oh, like
within
the
black
yeah,
community.
okay, gotcha.
They were violent and their quotes were whatever means necessary. One of the speakers were Stokely Carmichael in August 1965. Violence in the Watts neighborhood broke out, and they would throw stuff at the police like bottles, glass, and they would target white-owned businesses, burning them.
So pretty much what this one is just like a list of things that they believe that they require from the government and like American society in general. Pretty much the 10 points are an end to oppression of colored people and any other minority, ending police brutality, being able to have the basic human needs met like food, jobs, education, clothing, etc. Employment, freedom. And that's pretty much like all 10 points are based around those basic needs and how they're not being met in American society.
The state's this is your lesson, so. Yeah. Yeah.
I think so, because like, see.
Sid, I'm surprised you didn't end up bringing my candy room.
True. That was really cool. I was surprised we didn't. It's true.
How you guys doing? You guys have the smallest amount of primary sources,
Okay.
just so you know. And that is just by nature of what was available. But you also have more content in the textbook, so that was how I balanced it. How you feeling?
Good. I think this is just, it's essentially just saying it's a list and they're trying to educate the public. And like the book, it talks about like some violent tendencies, and then this one just explains the reason why they want to.
Yeah, what they want.
Yeah.
What is your based
About Black Power, how like they see Martin Luther King as the real threat because they believe that when Malcolm gets involved, he'll water down the Black Power, and they don't want that. And now it's almost like it's somewhat like a separate group now, basically.
That makes sense.
But it's a fractured group of people.
Yeah, like when they, like there's a part right here, like, oh, I think it's paper. There's like a march, and then Martin Luther King is part of that march, but I think it's something like they can't attack that march because he's there. So the police basically like, oh, we can attack the other group over here, the Black Power is not there, basically.
Yeah, they want to attack Eddie Robert King just because that'd be them attacking King.
What? Did you find any major events in the textbook?
Yeah.
For the Black Power movement? You need to read them.
1966, Stokely Carmichael announced the only way we're going to stop white men from whooping us is to take over. We've been saying freedom for 6 years and we ain't got nothing. If we're going to
starts singing it's Black Power.
Alright, I missed some of that, but I just wrote the date and his name.
Okay. And then, where was it? On August 11th, 1965, violence broke out in the Watts neighborhood. There was a lot of violence against cops and white owners, like shop owners.
On the watch
I only got two. So far.
So, consider this source from the So why would they create?
In 1966, the Black Power movement, Black Panther Party is created.
Yeah, so who are they targeting with that kind
And also wait, Stokely Carmichael were another person on the top. I had no idea how to spell it. Stokely.
STOKELEY. That's a weird one.
And what did he say in 66?
The Black Panther Party was created.
Yeah, you said Stokely Carmichael said something in 66 as well.
He announced the only way we're gonna stop them white men from working us is to take over.
The Black Panther movement is often depicted as violent and racist. Do the primary sources you are looking at challenge the concept in any way?
But pretty blatantly, stop the white men from working us, so let's take over.
Right. I mean, mine wasn't really like meant to be violent at all, but it's just aggressive. This one was.
Just a list of people who are speaking. Looks like they're trying to like educate the public on really kind of hard to tell. It's just like, oh, the other black media this time. This is what they're a member of. The black student union and whatnot.
I remember working on one stuff with one of the research by Belport and the research with us Spain. There's someone else who did research.
Maybe she's with the flyer saying not to migrate to
So the same thing. So you can figure out how you're going to bring this all together.
And then mine's just like the speech.
So there's the 20 things that they wanted, 20 demands.
Start figuring out what your side will be. Legal rights. So, that question, I was like, not particularly, they were very extreme, even so much so that they didn't agree with Martin Luther King trying to bring peace and like harmony with the white people because they just wanted to take over. They didn't want equality for everyone, they wanted power.
They did also demand to take over if they had fear of influence. They also wanted a separate government.
For the slide, what should we have on the slide?
Drawing up a new treaty.
I think we need like the Black Panther logo.
Creation of special agency and
Person
building
organizers.
building like American. In 73.
When it was formed, like what happened to the
1966.
I think we should talk about the Watts or somewhere in there.
Who helped form the party? Was Stokely one of them?
Huey Newton and Bobby Seale.
Not Herman.
No. He was a member, I think, but he wasn't.
You guys getting ready?
Yeah. He wasn't a founder.
Bobby who?
Bobby Seale. C-A-L-E.
And then we should talk about the.
Huey Newton.
And then
I have 16.
Carmichael was, he wasn't a founder, but he was a member, right?
So.
He's like their.
He always talks about some of that ideals.
It was formed in Minneapolis in 1960.
Hi, how
Hey.
you doing?
By Clyde Hill.
We want to put like a picture of the, like a Black Panther logo. Somewhere in there.
Top right. Now that is harder to Google now in 2018 than it used to be.
Is it like copyrighted now?
No, because of the film.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna make a reference of like Michael B. Jordan swoops in.
So like that? That work?
Yeah. Yeah, that one's really good.
Organization specifically.
Any other photos? Do you want any other people?
We can put Stokely Carmichael in there.
Who wants a picture? Could go Stokely.
Just a small one.
Like a massive one. We'll have to take up the.
Just like T-posing and like
T-posing. It would be very difficult.
Which photo?
which one's more iconic?
Here.
That one. Beard one.
This one?
Yeah. That's pretty iconic.
Looks iconic.
Okay.
What else?
Alright, you know what you got so far? Do you want anything else?
Visually, feel good about the visual.
Visual's good.
Yeah, it's just, that's
We have our Fompy Comic Sans.
How about Wingding?
Nope. The font is predetermined. Don't get too radical on me.
Comic Sans is pretty definite.
Wingding is just funny. Nobody knows.
I want to put a Fortnite GIF in there.
I got the default dance.
What do you guys
Yeah.
want
Just put it somewhere in there.
a little chip right there, just in the back.
What should they do?
Flashing lights.
Basically, just the default dance noise. You have to clap. That's why. Oh, I need to get it. I was like, he's gonna process it.
How did the watch ride start? So we talked to each other
I don't like.
Looks like.
Yeah.
Revolutionary
reacted.
And then what images?
They just walked around.
They
What do they
put up
do?
a
I'm
hang
trying to
log.
understand.
The crowd was protesting
Purchased
the
was
arrest of a young
kidnapping.
African American driver.
And whose opponents have been
All you do was run fast.
and mafia. And some of Ames' leaders had associates.
It's like how it all started. Like a guy just did normally just broke the law.
And ultimately.
It's how it all starts.
Marxists and Marxist leanings. Has been for those who direct, indirect, and indirect. For China, the IRA. IRA?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I have so much going on.
That's
do the other one.
The first from, I took a second to realize what's fun, but like, it's based on church incidents.
There are FBI reports.
What was the effect of the riots? Like what happened afterwards?
No, yeah.
So it was just violence against police
So
and
keep in
white
mind,
shop
this is
owners
obviously
predominantly, right?
coming from the FBI. They're viewing this as threat. They're gonna highlight like the most extreme
Protests.
So think about
Protests
how to
began in
frame
other
that in your lesson of how to talk
cities,
about
yeah.
the way the FBI was responding to the American Indian movement, right? And does that actually reflect what they were used? Right? Keep that in mind.
Did it change the laws? How you have like politically did it change anything?
It made
Had the
white
interviews
people
about why
fear
they
them
took Alcatraz, and keep that in mind, like what did they actually want
and
versus
it
what did the
gave
FBI
it intensified the white backlash
Yeah,
against
exactly.
political
So
economic gains
I
by
would
the African
focus your
Americans.
energy on trying to consolidate what
White
you
people
know
are more.
into one major place that
They're
everyone
like,
should know.
This was a really mad,
How
like, angry
you're
time
gonna
for
send that and what
everyone.
images do you want to go on?
Spider-Man.
To start
You
focusing on
could
how you're
be
gonna present it to the
And what did you get on why did you need to take over?
Put that in there somewhere.
That's kind of what we're talking about.
So make a black Spider-Man and a black Spider-Man, just point at each other.
MLK, look like our
You guys
movement.
have bullet points for me?
Yeah.
Or for the
So
like,
did
like how
1966 parties won.
I see it. In the Black Power movement, they're just like,
So do you want to talk about the
Okay,
foundation?
and then National Party and Body Seal are the founders.
So we're gonna have one film.
Stokely Carmichael, the speaker,
Love
that
that
equality,
they're taking out the
Do you guys want that whole thing in the bullet point, or do you want just Stokely Carmichael and then you can share?
Yeah, that works. And then August 11, 1965.
Are we all trained?
Yep.
And then.
Okay, I was up 1965, the Watts riot.
Base
signed up for
champion.
history, not public
Native
history.
American
Violence
friends.
against
I'm involved.
police and white shop owners.
Half the people.
Heck, you're only once an actor.
Started as a protest.
They were they.
Hang on, I'll probably just put, not gonna go too much.
Home baking isn't that bad.
I have bullet points for that. Just
Not that bad.
And then what remember, I cannot speak.
It's
Remember
worse
that
when you're
when you give your lesson,
microphone and a bunch of
sorry.
people around.
Remember when you give your lesson to include that last question, why do people consider them radical, right? What were they challenging? What is that fundamental nature that they're challenging, okay?
Oh, the whole MLK thing where he's like, oh, MLK is just watering down the conversation.
You want to talk about like
Yeah.
sanctions?
Yeah, they
Before we go into the
just
spiral about the
Hey,
process.
we're just gonna own all of this now. Fuck integrating. We're just gonna.
It's ours.
It's
ours.
Mine. This is mine now.
That's.
You mind if I just eat?
See that? That's mine. You touch it.
That looks nice.
I'm gonna throw
I'm
this
I'm
at
gonna
you.
take that.
That's a nice shop you got there.
It'd be a shame if
That's
someone fireball. And that's how the Watts riot started. Yeah.
Oh.
Watts riot, Black Panther creation, Carmichael.
Taking like apart, and kind of like.
I don't want any. I wrote it.
Carmichael's being like, yo, white people suck, let's just take it over.
Just take over.
And then citywide rioting, and then Black Panthers were like, that sounds good, let's just organize. Boom, this organization was flawless.
Having the basics.
I can't see any possible improvement.
no design flaws, so it's like,
See, these guys just want to genocide white people, and MLK just wanted to be communist. I mean, this turned out great.
there's no middle ground on this apparently.
Either everyone's equal or black people are the only people. Those are the only two options.
joins the party. So fast.
I wanted to know why they took over after us. I didn't find that in my research.
It's so fast.
I just found out that they did.
They wanted to
The Toy Story Superman or your Buzz Lightyear memes.
So
Who says racial superiority is reserved only for white people? Equality, baby.
And then I can't do it with you guys. It's too early for this.
You want him and that they want
Inequality is hard.
It will be epic, you know.
It's important.
I want to die. The end.
John Wick's in trouble. I need your help.
All you need is your mom's credit card.
And the three lacking numbers.
You want to talk about?
What if she uses
You want to talk about the
Express?
Yeah. What is Robert Penn read the page of the document that talks about
I can.
She was watching Detective Pikachu.
I wanted to, well, we're talking about.
Except that Mr. Mike, that guy's a weird guy.
Their wants first, and now.
Especially when you saw that he has stairs
He
in
was
the
late
top.
by
You
6
take over
minutes.
here and use theirs.
It's just that
And
bullshit.
then you
That's Pikachu. Yeah. Featuring
me
Only
and
7.
got the conversation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs kind of go to this, is they were asking pretty much for the same demands.
That way, like every day.
It's a 7-year quest line. I was just like, look, I have an A in this class. We're like really happy. I'm just like, you can do this. I might not be able to work on it. Like, you won't fail me because I'm actually really getting this just because it's kind of
Are you comfortable like reading the stuff, like reading the page stuff and what they wanted out of Alcatraz and
because I need to like have everything all at once. So I could work. Next.
You guys play for it in a year?
Just like if I can
And
just
she's
do
running
it,
out.
so that'd be better. Yeah, okay. Like that one? That one? And she said, well, just show the class.
What else?
Fellow kids.
Share something.
No worries.
I'll get you a chair. Grab the one from my desk.
So, I'll need a chair.
What else would you guys say?
Like
That means you talk items.
Should look into it then.
Remind me also, my brother and I are complete opposites of this other. I'm relatively like, my brother just like America. This photo, which is hilarious to me because
That
like,
ain't American. That's an AK.
yeah,
Excuse
you
me.
guys think that's
Keep off my.
Then like 9/11 is also pretty America.
Practice for your
I want to see it.
You wanna
They're all
do
on
RFC,
fire.
I do?
Okay. How ridiculous my little brother
We
is.
have here and talk about how AIM was talking about
In order to and then he's like, copyright tape, but I'm like, alright.
Yeah, so our first one is one founded by Flying
Nothing crazy.
Downport and Dennis Fish.
In America, our guns carry guns.
One of us has
There's an,
Remember any questions?
He's like wearing an American flag all the time, and like one of his friends is also like that, but like kind of a watered down version who just tries really hard to be like my brother.
I'm still writing.
Good job. Look at you.
Yeah, kind of.
With that band
This is
being
like
mediocre. And I'm just like, alright man, you can secede anything you put your mind to. What makes the cat with your bullshit?
We're gonna talk about this, the FBI.
Thanos.
oh no, not the Thanos again. When he started to die, then that Thanos card came out. I was like, oh my god.
I know. Really glad at this table.
Give us a second to do the first question.
What was that? S&W 5000. Sure. Yeah, what the revolver was.
And that's a presentation. Rick and important.
Yeah, no.
That'll make it memorable.
Here's like, what's it called? Americans, when they find out that fish have schools.
You're terrible.
Well, like.
What is that place?
Is there like, I think there is images of the operation in LA.
Scientists are developing bullet casings that hold flower seeds, so when they shot the drug, schools in 2020, it's just a flower field.
This is toxic. This table's toxic.
It's more like dark humor, slowly coming back in.
Right? Terrible people.
Yeah.
I hope the camera's not recording.
The camera's always
Which is,
recording.
it totally is.
The only
It's right
audio
behind
they
you,
can
too.
hear is us.
Oh man. Sorry.
It's like we bear.
It's a good thing they're worried about teachers teaching and not our dark internet.
I can see them right now. I can see them in the room just reviewing, and they start seeing the audio. They started focusing on
This
this.
just in. Classroom at FRCC. It's very toxic here.
Another mall.
And you want to show him?
Darn
As
Professional.
you want to talk about
formal
the
classrooms that
like goals?
Damn, it was always ruining everything.
The FBI, like that's the FBI document on the games. We're
Oh,
talking about
okay, cool.
how the view how the FBI
You
views
guys know, like pumpkin spice stuff.
the American Indian religion.
Kombucha bar was down the street.
Oh my gosh, it's
Food is vegan.
Gluten free.
Because I got a lot of like.
That is a long
So I wrote down a lot
Walking
of
through
like.
a vegan tent
Alright
on
team,
campus.
while you guys are finishing
Burger.
getting prepared, feel free to take about a 5-minute break.
Oh man.
So we're gonna start our presentations around we'll say 10:44. That's how we're gonna, I'm just gonna go crazy today. All right, 10:44, we're gonna start with the Black Power movement.
Oh, we're first?
I don't know, we're first.
Yeah, we're first, you said what?
Okay, we just tapped it. The thing is like, oh, my analog stick doesn't work anymore. Like, how do you even?
All right, group number 1, our Black Power movement. Get up here. Teach us something.
Okay. Okay, I forgot what the teacher's name is. Okay. This is the Black Power movement. In 1966, the Black Panther movement was created by, what's his name? Bobby Seale and Huey Newton. It's pretty radical.
Why?
Their ideals were to like gain power, and automatically they just wanted it by force.
Okay.
They believed a lot less in integration and they just wanted control over things. They didn't believe that Martin Luther King Jr. was on the right path because he was trying to have equality with white people instead of power over them. And they were just like, no, that's unacceptable, that's not enough. And then in August 11th, 1965, the Watts riots started. And this started by protesting the arrest of a young African-American driver. And it ended up with violence against police and white shop owners, and this just caused a lot of backlash with other white radical groups, like any of the white power movement. Like they took it as a direct threat, and it created more fear and anger and tension in the whole movement in the first place. They had, originally they were wanting to just have freedom from oppression and have equality jobs, basic needs met, like clothing, food, and education, but it kind of got warped into control and violence.
Somebody want to tell me about Stokely Carmichael?
Well, about him is that when he was a part of the Black Power movement, he himself believed, and what's his name, Rick, believed that we need to see that Martin Luther King as the real threat, because if he wanted to come in and talk about the Black Panther, he will basically water it down to make it less, instead of power hungry, to be on top, it will just be equal, right? And also, Martin Luther King did not like the word Black Power. It really did sound like more like we want to be on top. So they always saw it as a threat, basically. And a lot of times, like there was some what's it called? Movements, and then but Martin King was part of those movements, right? And then police can't really attack him because King was there, and there was like some parts like they can't really attack him. So that's when police could start turning around on the Black Power movement people and attack them instead. So they really saw Martin Luther King as really the bigger threat.
One of our primary sources was a list of panels and speeches given between 3 days in November. They didn't give a year. It's kind of hard to tell as to whether it was talking about the very radicalized ideas or the very just parallel to Martin Luther King's ideas. So it's, at one point they did believe in the basic equality as opposed to being that radicalized.
Right.
One of the things that Stokely Carmichael said was the only way we're going to stop the white men from whooping us is to take over. We've been saying freedom for 6 years and we ain't got nothing. What we're going to start saying now is Black Power. So it kind of shows how much radicalism there is.
Yeah. So what fundamental nature are they challenging?
whites in power, but like more so, not the equality, but like taking it to the next step where they're in power instead.
Anybody else have anything to add? All right, awesome. Let's give them all right, Cesar Chavez, UFW. The big,
Well,
yep.
it's okay. Who knows it? Names. We put the good stuff in the conversation.
Well, you're about to
You know,
start.
that counts.
Alright, so we've got Cesar Chavez, and he co-founded the NFWA with other people whose names I
With Dolores Huerta, is that who
forget.
you're
So, and they also help lead the California grape strike.
So that strike actually was 5,000 members of the National Farmers Workers Association, and they were against grape growers. The leaders of NFWA led a boycott of the purchase of grapes to force growers to sign a contract recognizing them as members of growers representatives.
His ultimate goal, Cesar Chavez's ultimate goal is to overthrow farm labor system in this nation, which treats farm workers as if they were not important humans. That's why he decided to leave the strike and start the NFWA.
What kind of conditions were the farm workers experiencing?
They'd like work all day with like no like bathrooms or food, and the kids would have to work too.
The strategies they created was they boycotted the grapes. And some stores that would even, like, if you had grapes, you were selling grapes, they wouldn't buy anything until you take them out. And they created coloring books filled with farm workers in order to gain support from younger generations.
So what makes him radical is that he fasted for 25 days during the strike. And I mean, and he held a boycott outside of Safeway too, so.
Yeah.
And then, so Cesar Chavez was really good friends with Robert F. Kennedy. He always supported Chavez, even though they didn't really have anything in common, just their commitment to social justice. The picture of Kennedy and Chavez, as Chavez ended his 25-day fast, became like the most iconic image of the farm worker movement. And then when Kennedy entered the presidential race, Chavez committed the resources of the union to help Kennedy. So that he was a really big influential part of mutual benefit. They both benefited of their friendship.
Yeah. So what fundamental nature was Chavez and NFWA or UFW? What were they challenging? What?
Just yeah, they were just challenging the working conditions.
Better salaries.
They basically just wanted equality like anybody else. They were twice as more unemployed Mexicans than there was white people.
Let's give them a hand round of applause. All right, American Indian. You can do it.
What's up, guys?
All right,
Right, so the American Indian movement was founded by Clyde Belcourt and Dennis Banks. Clyde Belcourt was a former inmate who, when researching about Native Americans, decided that he would be Native American again, and then helped develop some of the ideals for AIM, which was independence and that kind of thing. Dennis Banks was someone who championed Native American self-sufficiency and values.
So what they wanted was economic independence, revitalization of traditional culture, protection of legal rights, and most especially autonomy over tribal areas and restoration of lands that they believed have been legally taken. These demands included separate government for Native Americans, the return of lands to their Native American owners, the drawing up of new treaties between the U.S. and the Native Americans, and the creation of a special agency in Washington, D.C. for the rebuilding of the Native American communities.
And so, in 1969 to 1971, the occupation of Alcatraz took place. The Indians wanted this. They wanted Alcatraz because it was homeland to them. And so, anybody else? Go ahead.
The occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs came in 1972, and it was not armed at first. Basically, BIA had said that the Native Americans could stay overnight. There was a misunderstanding with some security guards at the time, and it kind of led into the occupation. They gave out their demands. The government said that they had this amount of time to leave the building. In the end, they said they were going to be forcefully evicted. It never actually happened, but the AIM did set up basically firebomb traps, and there was rumors of them having weapons inside the buildings, and they had set up in basically military patrols during the occupation. But when they left the Bureau of Indian Affairs with about $2 million worth of damage on the building. Wounded Knee happened a couple of years later, and it was an armed occupation where there was firing back and forth on both sides. I believe only 2 people on the AIM side actually died, but several people were severely wounded. And they had pretty much the same demands both times. It was like a list of 20 demands that basically wanted to ratify old treaties between the U.S. and Native American peoples.
Views from the FBI and radicalism. So from what I read, they pretty much thought that they were they weren't for the American people, the American Indians. They were kind of like a minority group, kind of like the Black Panther, organization to gain power and stuff like that. I spaced out. Sorry. They were getting a bunch of money from the feds and churches and other sources, and the leaders of the group were using it kind of their own personal profit and stuff like that.
Okay. And what fundamental nature are they challenging?
The U.S. doesn't own Native American lands, so the Native Americans do.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you for all going out on a limb and speaking in front of the class. It's not the easiest thing in the world. But you guys did a really good job. So hopefully this helped you
dive into one group in particular, but then also see that there is a lot of activism going on across the United States, and it was, in a lot of ways, a lot of people considered it to be radical, right? So one of the other big movements that was going on, and I'm only rushing through this because we only have about 20 minutes left, but yes, there is the N-word on this slide. This is just warning you. So this was an important sign that was used in the anti-war movement, and that particular slogan, which I will not repeat, but I'll let you guys read it, was used to help explain why black people were against the war, right? There was this sense, at least among black communities, that the war in Vietnam was racist, right, in a lot of ways. And we saw a little bit of a reflection of that. Remember when we watched that documentary on Monday, and they were talking about all of the words they used to refer to the North Vietnamese, and this sense of, they did turn the North Vietnamese into objects, right, instead of subjects, so it would be easier to kill them, right? So there is some truth to that, right, as we saw from that documentary. But black people particularly felt very connected to this idea that the Vietnam War was racist. So on a larger scale, Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, it was founded in 1960, and it was a group that considered themselves the quote-unquote new left, right? So they were the new liberals. They wanted to push back against some of the ideas that were, remember that the president at this time, Lyndon B. Johnson, is a Democrat, right? But these people are much more progressive, and they want to push back against some of these ideas, particularly in the concept of foreign policy, right? And so the Students for a Democratic Society started in 1960. They really didn't begin to develop a lot of traction until the second half of the 1960s, because that's when tensions really ramped up in Vietnam. They decided in 1967 to have what they called the Vietnam Summer. This was based off of, I don't know if you guys remember from your textbook or from lecture, when we talked about the Freedom Summer and the Freedom Rides, right? So during the Civil Rights Movement in the early 1960s, there was, in 63, there was the Freedom Summer, where there was constant activism going on throughout the South, right? About civil rights. So they took a page from the Civil Rights Movement and said, we're gonna have a Vietnam Summit. And so they tried to plan constant protests across the country throughout the summer. In 1968, the Tet Offensive happened, right? So the Tet Offensive was essentially an attack by the North Vietnamese into South Vietnam. And it was this moment where the U.S. was caught incredibly off guard, and it pushed them a lot further back than they were anticipating. And a lot of Americans were horrified that we could be caught off guard like that, and that now all of a sudden we were again pushing back in some areas that we had already won, right? And so there was this question among Americans of how will this end? Will it ever end, right? There was a lot of fear and anxiety. And then as Johnson began to order more and more bombings of North Vietnam, a lot of people at home who are seeing this on their screens day in and day out, right? They're seeing constant news coverage, videos, radio, telling them of what's going on in Vietnam and the atrocities that are going on there, and Americans begin to fight back. And so quite a few protests go on. And again, people protest for different reasons, right? So we have this group, a group of black people that are arguing the war is racist, right? You have quote unquote hippies who are pacifists who say no war is right? No war is just. You also have groups or organizations that are Vietnam veterans that are against the war, right? So veterans that came back and said, this isn't working, we need to leave, right? So there are all kinds of groups protesting for different reasons, but it's getting dramatic. Now, I'm going to come back to the Democratic Convention 1968. We're going to watch a video for that. But I want to talk a little bit about this last name right here, Jeannette Rankin. And this is, for me, this just helps me kind of put everything into perspective. I think of a lot of the times in history classrooms, we think of history as like, all right, chapter 1, this happened, chapter 2, this happened, right? And we think of things in that way, and we forget that these are real people with real lives that are living through all of these experiences, right? And that people that are experiencing what's going on in the 60s, many of them also experienced the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, right? Like sometimes we block it out in our brains and we don't see the longevity of the people that are experiencing this. So I'll tell you a little story. So Jeannette Rankin was one of the first women elected to Congress, and she was in Congress in World War I in 1917. She's the only woman that voted, she's the only congressman, the only woman that voted against the war. She was a pacifist, right? So she voted no about going to war in World War I, okay? She was voted out of office after that. She ran again in the 40s. She was again one of the only no votes against World War II and entering the war with Japan, okay? She was voted out of office. And in 1968, she's right here, this is her marching to end the Vietnam War. She's in her 80s, right? And so this is one of those incredible stories where you have this person that has been involved in so many different eras of American history, and her beliefs have stayed the same, right? She's a pacifist. You can agree or disagree with her, but she just has this wonderful strength in her convictions, right? That is, I think, very admirable. And to me, that's one of those really interesting things, right? That reminds us that these stories aren't singular in time, right? It all comes from somewhere, right? Everyone has their own background and history that they bring to their own experience. So we're going to talk about the Democratic Convention of 1968. Now, remember, I said earlier that there was some drama going on. So in 1968, right, we have the Tet Offensive. We have AIM is beginning to be active. Cesar Chavez is on his hunger strike, right? The Black Power movement is gaining strength. Okay, but you were supposed to pause. Crazy people.
When I became Mike's worried, we'd stay up all night worried. But now he's healthy, drinks powder, doesn't worry about anything.
It's fine. We're gonna watch this one.
Karen's got the password to your phone.
That is so creepy.
She knows.
The year is 1968, the month is August.
All right, so what I wanted to get at is that in 1968, so we're in Vietnam, it's an election year, right? You all have lived through elections in your lives. They tend to be pretty dramatic in terms of the news, right? Well, arguably 1968 was probably one of the most, okay, dramatic. Maybe, I mean, the Civil War is pretty dramatic, but 1968 was pretty dramatic. And two of the big things that happen is, well, first of all, in April, Martin Luther King is assassinated, right? Which affects the entire nation in a myriad of ways. And then in June, the Democratic nominee, so Lyndon B. Johnson decided he wasn't going to run for a third term, for his second full term, right? And Robert Kennedy had said, I'm going to run, okay? Now he accepted, he won all of the primaries, not all of the primaries, but he won most of the primaries. He was about to accept his nomination. He was assassinated, okay? So Robert F. Kennedy is now assassinated, as well as John F. Kennedy, right? And there's this fear, right, among people that everything is so politically volatile. And so you have to imagine at the Democratic Convention, they have to have another convention because now they have to nominate someone else, okay? So it's August, right? And you also have these people who are part of this new left, that are people who are protesting against the war, that are interested in keeping the country out of Vietnam. And so they are advocating at this national convention for a candidate who will take us out of Vietnam. And tensions erupt.
And Scott Simon of NPR is taking us back in time.
Worlds collided at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. Young and old. War and peace. Law and order.
You can't take that week in isolation. 68, one of the most dramatic and traumatic years in the nation's
history.
On to Chicago and let's win there.
They kind of all rolled to Chicago. You could feel it coming.
Bill Daley, who would become President Obama's chief of staff, was a college student and spent the convention at the side of his father, Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley.
We knew that there was going to be an enormous challenge on the streets, and my father believed that he was the defender of the city.
The peace groups are demanding permission to march on Convention Hall the night the Democrats nominate their candidate for president.
Thousands of protesters expected. 12,000 Chicago police officers were deployed along with the National Guard.
A Democratic convention is about to begin in a police state. There just doesn't seem to be any other way to say it.
The country was being torn apart by the Vietnam War.
Not long before joining CBS News, Bob Schieffer was a young reporter in 1968, attending his first national convention.
It was supposed to be a place where the Democrats were going to get their business all together, but everybody knew it was going to be difficult.
I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
President Johnson was forced out by the success of Senator Eugene McCarthy in New Hampshire. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. The night he won the California primary. Vice President Hubert Humphrey didn't enter any primaries, but was favored to win the nomination.
Hubert Humphrey was the establishment, and he represented the big bosses and the traditional Democratic Party, the politicians, the big city mayors. They were certainly not satisfied with Jim McCarthy. His sole campaign was, I'll end the war in Vietnam.
The city said in a year of assassinations and riots, it couldn't grant permits to protesters to march on the convention or sleep in city parks.
We knew the convention was coming down. We knew that there was probably going to be some problems. We were getting pelted.
Bill Giaconetti was a rookie policeman in 1968, posted to the protests in Grant Park.
I come home from Korea, stationed in the DMZ, and the next trip, all my buddies went to Vietnam.
Wednesday night, August 28th, the confrontation that had been building all week, probably all year, burst open on the street between Grant Park and the convention headquarters hotel.
Ooh. The first deputy said, clear the streets. After the final warning, he said, if you don't move out of the street, my officers are going to clear the street. And that's what we had to do on that night.
They're just swinging their clubs like just a bunch of idiots.
The problem wasn't the regular people. The problem was the agitators, and there were a lot of them. My partner next to me, he caught a house brick in the chest and they had to take him to the hospital.
The notion that anybody came to the party with the idea of a big fight is wrong.
Marilyn Katz was the 23-year-old head of security for Students for a Democratic Society.
I understand that they felt that, one, they should keep control of their city and that the Democratic Party, and the mayor was saying, we're counting on you to keep things in order. There was no excuse for beating us.
Did you ever see anyone throw anything?
Yes, yes I did. And if I had had something, I would have thrown it back too, because we had done nothing.
The violence in Grant Park was indeed seen all over the world and at the convention.
We just received some film of the police and the demonstrators,
where anti-war delegates erupted.
And with George McGovern as President of the United States, we wouldn't have to have Gestapo tactics in the streets of Chicago.
Despite the uproar, Humphrey won the Democratic nomination by more than 1,000 votes.
But once all these riots had broken out and all this trouble that happened in Chicago, the nomination wasn't worth the paper it was written on.
When it goes that far, it's time to make a change.
Richard Nixon ran on a law and order platform and won the presidency in a close election. At the end of 1968, a special commission called what happened that night on the streets of Chicago, a police riot. Bill Giaconetti, who would be decorated in 1979 for taking 2 bullets to free 13 hostages, says,
well, it wasn't a police riot.
And Marilyn Katz, now a well-connected public relations executive, agrees.
I think that puts too much blame on the individual cops. I think that Daley made a mistake. He really wanted to maintain control of the city and demonstrate it.
Richard J. Daley would be reelected twice after 1968, but his actions at the Democratic Convention he brought home that year would stain his image in history and the party and city he loved.
Did your father ever have second thoughts about his actions or anything he should have done differently?
We would probably regret getting the convention, but he never really said that. He was defensive.
Cool.
That's crazy.
So, what questions do you have? Nothing? Our experts down? Wonderful. All right, so, I have a couple of announcements for you guys, and then I have a favor to ask. So, announcements-wise, your primary source, your fourth primary source, right, from 1960 to 1980 is due today. If you don't have it with you, email it to me by the end of the day, per usual, it won't be counted late. November 26th is when your movie selection is due for your last reading reflection. So you have to tell me what movie you're doing by November 26th, okay? And you can just tell me in class if you want to just come prepared, that's fine. Or send me an email. And then December 5th, all late work is due December 5th. Okay? So you were about to head out on fall break, take advantage of that time off to complete any late assignments you have so that I can give you some credit. Okay? I'm gonna pass out, you guys remember we did the keep, stop, start things? We did this back in, I think, September. Wow, it's been a long time. So I'm gonna pass these around. Please don't put your name on them, but I just want you to answer 3 questions. What would you like me to keep doing? What would you like me to stop doing? What would you like me to start doing? This will help me so that our last few weeks go wonderfully, right? We only have 5 more classes with each other.
What?
I know.
Forever?
It's pretty bonkers. So I'm gonna hand these out, and then I also have reading reflections to pass back. I have more.
Thank you.
I still need one. Okay. You guys all have one?
Thank you.
Thank you. What? What's that? Were you
Supporting all of
Oh,
us,
you
supporting
wanted
that.
Oh my god, of course you did. I knew that. Give me 1 second, I'll pull out the reading reflection.
I just get see them now.
Yeah, there's a,
What's
put it in this file.
That's it. Sorry, I can see it now.
With our papers, we're supposed to be doing a presentation.
can talk about that when we get back. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Because that's, full break's kind of my paper writing plan.
Yes.
For every class.
Yes.
Focus on your paper and then, yeah, you can talk about the presentation. Really short, super short. Big.
Put it on there, please. Historical film and movie that's so cool that
I don't have an extra copy of it, but it's
no, she gave it it's on page 105. You can copy that questions or ask for sure.
Or just leave it here? I'm guessing, I'm gonna